So I paused before to do a little bit more smoothing so that you didn't have to watch all of that process today. But here's my backside, the one that I said that I was going to smooth out the coils on. So it's pretty much finished. What's really nice is the rubber rib. Some of them are a little bit bigger than this and some of them are smaller. So I'm borrowing one from another student. And if I just gently take this rib over the surface, I might have a little tool marks that show up, but I'm really going to be able to see if there's any more lumps and bumps that I want to remove and to continue to smooth that area. The red clay has something in it called grog. And that grog is those little teeny tiny gritty pieces that you might be feeling. If you just use a sponge to smooth the surface of your coil pot, you're going to get all of those gritty pieces to come up to the surface. And then it's going to be rough feeling regardless of what you do to smooth. So by using the rubber rib, I'm blending the clay together still without removing too much of the clay around the grog or those little gritty pieces. So we don't want to just rely on a wet sponge. I do want you to use a wet sponge for some things, but just by using the rib, my surface is feeling pretty smooth and slick. And then I could even just go over with my hand and finish smoothing some areas out. So right now, that's what my side without the coils looks like. And I can come back down around the bottom area. You can see a spot. And just kind of keep working over it. It takes some time to do the smoothing, so be patient. Now on the other side, basically what I worked on during the pause was just getting those coils to stand out more, and then also getting the little balls of clay that I added in a few spots. So right now my coils are very defined, and this would be okay if you wanted to go over with your rib. You could smooth a little bit that way. Or with the coils, it is okay to use a damp sponge. So I'm just going to squeeze, or actually dip my sponge into some water and squeeze that water out. And then I'm just going to do a little bit of smoothing that way. I don't want to add too much water to my clay because I don't want to make it too soft. I still want it to support itself. And then, like here, I got some extra water. So maybe I'm going to have to come back in with a rubber tip tool or a wood tool. Use my finger. But a little bit of water is okay if your coils have some crackles to them, maybe some crinkles. You want to clean those up a little bit more. But if I keep rubbing and rubbing, again, the red clay, it's called terracotta clay, has grog in it. And so if I continue to use water, I'm going to pull the clay away and reveal the grog inside of the clay, and then glazing is going to be more difficult. So we just don't ever want to use just water for smoothing. You want to get used to using your hands, your fingers, the tools, working back and forth between your hands, the fingers, the tools. So even though I added some water, I'm still going back over with my finger and smoothing over those wet areas just so that that grog isn't exposed. So I'm using the water a little bit. And so the look of my coil now looks a lot more defined, and it's also a lot more cleaned up. So the last thing that I'm going to do before I start to let the coil pot dry is I'm going to round the top edge. So just like you did with your pinch pots, and you can start with a little water and with your finger. I'm going to dip it back into my water. Don't use slip. All slip is wet mushy clay. So if you want to round something out, you're not going to add glue to it. You're going to round it out using that sponge. but then I'm going to pull that grog to the surface, so I want to use my finger and also round and blend that out too. The grog gives it strength, and that's why we use it, so that we can build fairly fast, and it gives you an opportunity to use a different type of clay body. If you remember way back from the beginning of the quarter, a clay body is a clay that is used for a specific use. So terracotta is kind of traditionally the clay that a lot of artists or potters use to create things out of coils. It's not the only clay you can use, so I don't want you to think that there's some rule or law out there that says you must only use red clay, but it is most commonly used. So I'm getting this edge back here to smooth out nice, but I still have a little bit more work. All of this takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of time. So when you're in the studio, try to keep your focus so that you have as much possible time to build, or you are always welcome to come in to RTI or any other time that you have available during the school day. Now my inside, I can use my damp sponge inside to finish smoothing that out, or that rubber rib. As long as I support, that rubber rib is also going to make sure that I can't see the coil lines. If it's not perfect, you'll probably be okay. But if you can see a lot of lines on the inside, that just means you didn't blend your coils very well, and it gives you a very, very high risk for cracking. If your piece cracks, it's pretty hard to do anything with the red clay. Some of my magic mender that I have in the studio works with gray clay, but if you put it on the red clay fires to an orange color, and then the mender would fire white, so it would look weird under the glaze. So it's best if you just get everything blended really well. So at this point, I'm going to say, hey, I'm done with my coil project, and I'm going to let it start drying. I never want to leave it directly out of the bag once I finish. I want to dry it slow. If you dry clay too fast, it also tends to crack. So I'm going to put it back in the bag. I'm not going to add any water to it. And I'm going to leave the bag kind of loose, because once it's into your cubby, it's not really getting any air exposed to it. Before I put it into my bag and put it away for today, I'm going to take one of my tools. The needle tool is probably the best, but I don't have mine over here. So I'm just going to take my wood tool and I'm going to draw my initials onto the bottom. So I just have my initials down there. That way, once they're fired, they all look kind of similar depending upon what you do with your piece. And so I want you to be able to find yours, or at least make sure it's yours. It has happened where someone has accidentally glazed something else, thinking it was theirs, and it was someone else's project. So that's going to help you get to the smoothing. Remember, serrated metal rib, crisscrossing, smooth rib to get rid of the coils. Wood tools, rubber tip tools, a little bit of water to smooth out the look of the coil and to clean it up and make it look more even. So now I'm going to start the drying process simply by covering it and putting it away. And then on the next day, I'm going to start uncovering it, make sure there's no bag on it. So one day with the bag, the next day without the bag, but in your cubby. And then after that, we can start leaving them out in the studio so that they dry. It is fall, so the air is starting to get a little bit drier this time of year, but it's not so dry that things are going to dry super fast. So one day in the bag after you finish, one day in your cubby but not in the bag, and then the next day you can leave it uncovered. That way it doesn't dry too quickly and hopefully helps prevent some cracking.